Explain this to us a little bit, because this is a bit obscure. It's an international tribunal, not necessarily a court, under a specific UN convention. What is this decision?
This is a very important decision, David, an important rebuke to the Chinese. The Chinese have been asserting, actually since the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek in the 1940s, control over most of the South China Sea. That is a complete variance with international law, in this case, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And there was a ruling today in The Hague by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is the relevant court, essentially saying the Chinese position has no legal standing. So it's very important for the maintenance of international law, which is one of the foundational points of our world today, a very important signal to China that it cannot run roughshod over the rights of small countries like the Philippines, and the Philippines was the country that brought this suit.
So Ambassador Burns, often these international law issues feel a bit abstract. This is quite concrete, because there's a shoal out there that China has actually been building out land around, and they actually have some military presence there, don't they? Could that impede some of the international trade across the South China Sea?
Well, it could, and as you know, some of the great industrial economies of the world are in Asia, and so through the Straits of Malacca goes nearly half of the container traffic, a lot of the energy, oil and gas traffic in the world. So commercial fleets have to be able to travel through the South China Sea and be able to have their rights of not being impeded by Chinese naval vessels. American naval vessels also have a right to exercise freedom of navigation in international waters. This is one of the most important building blocks of the world today and of the world of the last several hundred years. Freedom of passage, freedom of navigation. And so today's ruling did argue that China's legal claim is absolutely without foundation. They've been building, they call it facts on the water. They've been building military installations in the Scarborough Shoals in the Philippines. They've been also contesting the rights of Indonesia, of Vietnam, and other ASEAN countries. So the Chinese are going to defy this ruling. They've already said from Beijing they won't recognize it, but the pressure is going to be on China at some point, David, I think, to agree to negotiations, because they're completely isolated internationally on this issue.
There has been military activity both on the part of the United States and China, with naval vessels going into the area, and it feels like coming closer and closer to each other. What is the real danger of some actual engagement out there?
Well, if there's a risk, and there is a risk, the risk would be of accidental conflict, and that the two might not be in communication with each other. And you don't want to see that happen either on the high seas, and you certainly don't want to see it in the air. And so there's been a great deal of work by the United States and China over the last year or two to increase transparency between our naval vessels in the region, so they know where they are at all times. And the Chinese have a profound respect for American power. I think President Obama has done the right thing here, David, over the last several months. He has been sending American naval vessels in international waters, in what everyone else believes to be international waters, to make the point in these freedom of navigation exercises that every country has the right to transit through this space. If China succeeded in preventing vessels from going through these waters, it would be a fundamentally negative signal for the world economy and for politics.
Nick, you've spent your entire professional career as a diplomat for the United States. Anticipating what China is thinking about, what do you think their ultimate end game is here? What do you think they are trying to accomplish?
Well, there's a great deal of nationalism right now in the Chinese public and within elements of the Chinese government. And what you're seeing is China is asserting that, well, from ancient times, these waters were under China's control, and therefore they should be now. But that's a complete variance with international law as we have built the international legal system, particularly following the Second World War. So I think the Chinese are struggling. They don't want to be branded an international outlaw, but that's what this ruling today essentially says. And yet they have to placate their own population. They have to placate nationalist elements of their government, like the People's Liberation Army. This is a very difficult balancing act for President Xi Jinping. I think what the United States will do is try to encourage China not to react in a harsh way, not, for instance, to have major military exercises or declare that there's an autonomous air zone that China would control, and hope that passions will cool and eventually China will agree to negotiations over this issue.